Hi, I'm Andrew, and welcome to PlantLife Project. Well, several months ago, I decided to add a dirt substrate to my 29-gallon riparium in order to be able to grow submerged plants, but also give the riparium plants an additional source of nutrients. And all the plants are doing great. At the time, I decided to experiment with using a layer of clay to go over the underlying dirt layer instead of sand, and then put the gravel on top of the clay. Well, it's been several months, everything's been fine, but lately I've been having higher than normal nitrate levels, and I haven't made any other big changes to the tank. I only have 8 fish in here, and they're on a minimal feeding schedule, just a few times per week. And I have a lot of plants. So my suspicion is that the clay cap layer is allowing some nutrients from the dirt to leach into the water column, or the waste being produced in the water can't break down fast enough through the clay layer before it builds up. So I've decided to add a layer of sand over the gravel to see if that stops the leaching, which I'm confident that it will if that's the problem. I normally use a sand cap over dirt and haven't had issues with leaching in other tanks. Now, my goal is always to minimize water changes as the system allows and rely on the plants to filter out the excess nutrients. But I have been doing 25% or so water changes every 1 or 2 weeks lately. Now, of course, this is normal for a lot of fish keepers, but what I want long term is to have a system that can self-sustain as much as possible with minimal intervention from me.
To add sand to a tank, you don't have to drain all the water and tear the whole tank down. What I normally do is drain about half of the water and just leave everything else alone, even leave the fish in, and cover about half of the substrate with the level of sand that I want, and then wait about 1 week before covering the other half of the substrate.
And the reason for this is when you add sand to the top layer of the substrate, you're going to smother the aerobic bacteria living in that top layer. So waiting several days or weeks allows that first half of the tank to recover, allows that beneficial bacteria to start recolonizing in that new sand, so that when you lay the sand down on the other side of the tank, you still have half of your substrate helping to biologically filter the water. So if you cover all of your substrate at one time, you're going to smother all of the aerobic bacteria living in the substrate at one time. And that's going to greatly impact the biological filtration in your system. And that can lead to an ammonia spike, which, depending on your your bio load in your tank, overnight you could have dead fish or an algae outbreak in the following weeks. So to reduce the risk of disaster, it's best to just cover half of the substrate, do daily water testing and water changes if necessary, and then 1 week or so you can add the rest of the sand, continue to do the daily water testing, and that way you can further monitor this transition.
Well, before adding the sand, I removed some lava rocks that were sitting on this side of the tank, and I'll place them back later. Now, these are going to have a good amount of beneficial bacteria, and they can help out with recolonizing the new sand. Now, concerning the cloudy water during this time, what I like to do after adding sand is just give it a day or two to see if the cloudiness settles down, and it normally does. But if not, then I will worry about a water change. The sand I use is pretty clean, generally speaking, but if your sand is not, you can rinse the sand before adding it to your tank.
Now, this process may seem unnecessarily drawn out to some people, but I believe it's best to make big changes to your tank slowly and methodically in order to minimize disruption to the system. It will help you avoid complications and can prevent extra time and labor down the road. So, what about the submerged plants? Is adding sand going to bury the plants too deeply in the substrate? Well, that depends on the type of plants you are growing. With stem plants, like water wisteria for example, it's likely not going to hurt them because they grow roots along each node along their stems. So if you bury the plant in the new sand, then it's going to stimulate root growth along those nodes that are buried, and so it's going to increase their root system. Now, with plants that develop leaves at the crown, like Amazon sword, you are likely going to need to lift them to accommodate for the new sand layer, because the plants will die if you bury the crown. Now, this will likely stress the plant once you lift it up to accommodate for the new sand. So you will need to trim the older leaves off of the plant, and this will help reduce the amount of leaves overall that the roots have to support. And this will help the plant to begin reestablishing itself. Now, alternatively, instead of lifting the plant, you could put rocks around the base to shore up the new sand layer. But over time, that sand is likely to shift around, so you'll need to keep a close eye to make sure that the sand is not burying the crown.
Well, now after 1 week, I have a sand cap over the substrate with minimal disruption to the system. I will continue to test the water to make sure things are bouncing out properly.
Well, I'm really curious to see if my substrate leaching theory is correct or not. So I will be sure to give you an update on this tank in the future. Well, thanks for watching today, and thanks for your support as usual, and I will see you next time. And remember, it's all about the plants.